we're still considering the context, that is, the European context of early American history. And perhaps the most important country we need to focus on is England, insofar as the colonies that come to North America and that are settled there are settled primarily by the English, particularly on the East Coast. Well, about the same time that Martin Luther was stirring up Germany with a protest, with a reformation, pulling much of Germany out of the Roman Catholic Church, the King of England was about to do something very similar. Henry VIII of the Tudor dynasty was interested in preserving the dynasty's last name, that is the Tudor family, and he insisted that he needed a male heir. Well, his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, produced a female and then didn't produce any further. That made Henry disappointed and upset, and he insisted on a divorce of his Catholic wife, Catherine. Well, the Pope said there's no good reason here. She's a good Catholic girl, and you just can't send your wife away for no good reason. So the Pope refused to grant Henry his divorce. Well, Henry, pretty arrogant fellow, decides, hey, look, who do you think you are? I'm the King of England. I'll just start my own church, and I'll declare myself the Pope. And indeed, the Supremacy Act declares Henry the head of this new church called the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. And one of the very first things that Henry does is he grants himself a divorce. And so now we have another religious institution in England, namely the Church of England. And by birth, anybody born in England is automatically a member of that church, and their pope or their head is the monarch of England. It's true to this very day. Well, Henry will die in the 1840s, and his son, he actually does have a son by one of his later wives. He has 6 wives altogether. And his eldest son, or his only son, is Edward. Edward was the 6th young man named Edward in the monarchs of England. So Edward VI will become the heir to Henry. Now the problem here is Edward VI is only 9 years old when his father dies. So he's put in the position of being supervised by a number of trustees. And his principal supervisor, Archbishop Cranmer, is a Protestant of the Lutheran brand. And so as Edward is unofficially or officially the king, Archbishop Cranmer is unofficially running the country. And Archbishop Cranmer will bring all kinds of Protestants into the government and into professorships at the universities of Oxford and Cambridge, where they can make a lot of influence and do a lot of change a lot of minds about religion and those sorts of things. Well, little Edward was a very ill young man. He was crowned at age 9, and he was dead before he would have been able to get his driver's license. Of course, he had no driver's license, but he was dead before he was 16. And so his sister, remember the first female that was born to Henry and Catherine of Aragon, was Mary. Mary had been raised in Spain by her mother, who had been divorced against her will from Henry VIII, and she grew up a very, very staunch Roman Catholic. So when her Protestant brother dies, she comes to the throne committed to return the English country, the English nation, back to Rome. And so first thing she does is she kind of goes in and cleans house, gets rid of the Protestants in Oxford and Cambridge and those who are in the government, particularly people like Archbishop Cranmer, who will be killed, who will be many burned at the stake, many executed, and Mary will develop a nickname from the Protestants. They'll call her Bloody Mary. Well, she doesn't reign very long. Her reign is about 5 years long. It's a very deadly and gruesome reign. But then her younger sister, Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, one of Henry's other wives, will come onto the throne. Now, Elizabeth is a politician, and she knows that the fights really here are between the Catholics on one side of the spectrum and the Protestants or the Lutherans on the other side of the spectrum. And her father's religion, the Church of England, she felt was a good middle ground. So when she came to the throne, she reestablished the Church of England. And she was kind to some degree to some dissenters on both sides, although she was very concerned about Catholic plots, and she wasn't a huge fan of Lutheranism in any way, shape, or form. But one thing that she was able to do was to be very popular with the people. She would go out, legendarily go out in her carriage on a Sunday afternoon and have tea with the commoners and things of that nature. But she reestablished her father's understanding of the Church of England. She reinstated the Supremacy Act, put in a prayer, the Anglican prayer book, and then she began to take an interest in the Americas, particularly the competition with the Spanish for taking over America. Elizabeth reigned for a long, long time, almost as long as the current Elizabeth is reigning, but not quite. But when she died, the legend is she died a virgin. She had no offspring, and so the reign had to go to a cousin. And so it actually went to her cousin from Scotland named James. His last name was Stuart, and he had been the sixth king of Scotland named James, so that he's referred to as James the Sixth of Scotland and James the First of England. The same man, just a difference in the number of Jameses that preceded him. When James came onto the throne, he was very arrogant, very strong, and he said that he wrote a book saying that the king is God's representative on earth. And if anybody ever tries to go against anything the king does, then in fact that person is going against God himself. He also got into the business of translations. This is a time, remember that Luther had translated the Bible into German. So there were some Protestants who had translated the Bible in Geneva into English, but now James wanted an official authorized version of the Bible. And in 1611, he got scholars together at Westminster, and they translated the Bible into what's called the King James Version of the Bible, which is the best-selling book of all time. And that's largely because James did not want to be subject to any other biblical translation. James will reign until 1625, when his son, Charles I, will come into the throne. And Charles was probably as Catholic as a person could be without officially being Catholic. He appointed to the archbishopry of the Church of England a man named Laud, who was very Catholic in his sentiments and very much against Luther, hated Luther in everything that he wrote and said. And Charles actually married a fully Catholic woman, Henrietta Maria of France. And so many people felt that by marrying a Catholic wife, the throne had gone back into the hands of the Catholics. This led to a major civil war with the Protestants who were members of Parliament. That civil war led to the people in Parliament winning, and when they captured Charles, they beheaded him in 1650.